Lonnie, stop jumping on the couch. Scuba Esteban, what's happening? What? So far, so good. So far, so good. Let's see what we can do here to get something on in the background. How's your day going? How's your evening going? Everything okay? That's not what I want. Just need some white noise in the background. How's that? Camp, how's that, Camp? Can you hear that okay? Or is that too loud? Just want something in the background. You're it so far, sweetie. You are it. And who knows, maybe you'll be the only one. And I'll be just reading to you. Hey, Sunshine, what's happening? Welcome back in. Gary! You are always it. But tonight we got Gary and Sunshine in. I got my new cheaters, my new spectacles that I will showcase this evening. I think you guys will like them. They're cute. I look like Santa Claus. How's that for the rooster? Looking old. What's up, Kurisha? Kurisha, what's happening? Just got your birthday video. Nice. Nice. Very cool. I got my my reading blanket. The air just kicked on. Can you hear that? Can you hear it really loud? Or is it just mild in the background? Sick of the rain? I hear you. I hear you. What's up, Jax? How you doing? It's loud? Is it distracting loud? Or is my voice enough? What's up, Lambo? Doing good. How are you? Fantastic. It's loud. Shit. I could do something about that. Alright. We're gonna go turn it off. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Let's see if that helps. B-dubs, what's happening? So I raised the set point. So we'll see. Once it goes off, it should stay off for a while. What's up, Katie? We're still here. I hope so. Just about 7 o'clock. We're gonna get our read on. And there it goes. It is off now. Now the only thing you should hear is my babbling brook. My babbling mouth. Shell Bell Gazelle, what's happening? So I'm looking forward to reading this. I haven't really opened it yet. It's gonna be a lot of fun, I think. I think, therefore I am. How's everybody doing otherwise? Everybody all right? Before we get started? I'll let you guys pile in. And you can barely see them. See that? And I can see better too. You guys are always telling me I can't see. Well, now I can see. Much better. I like it. I will read the inside jacket. This epic work of the imagination has captured the hearts of millions of readers worldwide since it was first published more than a decade ago. Its special story within a story is an irresistible invitation for readers to become part of the book itself. And now this modern classic and bibliophile's dream is available in hardcover again. The story begins with a lonely boy named Bastian and a strange book that draws him into the beautiful but doomed world of Fantasia. Only a human can save this enchanted place by giving its ruler, the childlike empress, a new name. But the journey to her tower leads through lands of dragons, giants, monsters, and magic. And once Bastian begins his quest, he may never return. As he's drawn deeper into Fantasia, he must find the courage to face unspeakable foes and the mysteries of his own heart. Readers, too, can travel to the wondrous, unforgettable world of Fantasia if they will just turn the page. Cool. You all have a great day? Okay, Jax. Oh, thanks, Guy. I appreciate that. So, looking even more dapper, Dom. Old John Lennon. Yeah. It does have a John Lennon feel to it. I'm sipping coffee here and wondering if I should be and shouldn't be sipping water. Giuseppe Grande. What's happening, brother? My new nickname for Joey Fats is Giuseppe Grande. I think I might have done a disservice by drinking coffee. I think I will stop now and drink some water. So we got 8 in here. What time is it? 7:01. We'll wait a couple minutes and see if anybody else comes. Either way, it'll be fun. I'll read it out loud to myself. I don't care. I'm just glad you guys are here. Giuseppe Grande. We can see the top viewers now. Really? I can see how many likes I got. I got 52 likes. What's happening, Joey? How are you, brother? Joe's real name is actually Giuseppe, however you spell it. That's actually how you spell it. No, actually, you spelled it wrong. It's Guiessepee, I think. Well, thank you, Camp. Thank you, Carisha. Oh, dear. Oh, dear, what? Tiger Nikki, not Nikki. What's happening? Tiger Nikki's in for a little bit. She's at work, but she chose to join us for a little bit. I'm a terrible speller, believe it or not. I used to be good. All right. Let's begin. The Neverending Story by Michael End. Carl Conrad Corinder, Old Books. This inscription could be seen on the glass door of a small shop, but naturally this only was the way you looked at it if you were inside the dimly lit shop, looking out at the street through the plate glass door. Outside, it was gray, cold, rainy November morning. The rain ran down the glass and over the ornate letters. Through the glass, there was nothing to be seen but the rain-splotched wall across the street. Suddenly the door was opened so violently that a little cluster of brass bells tinkled wildly, taking quite some time to calm down. The cause of this hubbub was a fat little boy of 10 or 12. His wet, dark brown hair hung down over his face. His coat was soaked and dripping, and he was carrying a school satchel slung over his shoulder. He was rather pale and out of breath, but despite the hurry he had been in a moment before, he was standing in the open doorway as though rooted to the spot. Before him lay a long, narrow room, the back of which was lost in the half-light. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books of all shapes and sizes. Large folios were piled high on the floor, and on several tables lay heaps of smaller, leather-bound books, whose spines glittered with gold. The far end of the room was blocked off by a shoulder-high wall of books, behind which the light of a lamp could be seen. From time to time, a ring of smoke rose up from the lamplight, expanded, and vanished in darkness. One was reminded of the smoke signals that Indians used for sending news from hilltop to hilltop. Apparently someone was sitting there, and, sure enough, the little boy heard a cross voice from behind the wall of books. "Do your wandering inside or outside, but shut the door. There's a draft." The boys obeyed and quietly shut the door. Then he approached the wall of books and looked cautiously around the corner. There, in a high, worn leather wing chair, sat a short, stout man in a rumpled black suit that looked frayed and somehow dusty. His paunch was held in by a vest with a flowered design. He was bald, except for outcroppings of white hair over his ears. His red face suggested a vicious bulldog. A gold-rimmed pince-nez was perched on his bulbous nose. He was smoking a curved pipe which dangled from one corner of his mouth and pulled his whole cheek out of shape. On his lap, he held a book, which he had evidently been reading, for in closing it had left the thick forefinger of his left hand between the leaves as a kind of bookmark. With his right hand, he now removed his spectacles, examined the fat little boy, who stood there dripping. After a while, the man narrowed his eyes, which made him look more vicious than ever, and muttered, "Goodness gracious." And he opened the book and went on reading. The little boy didn't know quite what to do, so he just stood there, gaping. Finally, the man closed his book, as before, with his finger between the pages, and growled, "Listen, boy. Listen here. I can't abide children. I know it's the style nowadays to make a terrible fuss over you, but I don't go for it. I simply have no use for children. As far as I'm concerned, there's no good for anything but screaming, torturing people, breaking things, smearing books with jam and tearing the pages. It never draws on them, the grown-ups. They also have their troubles and cares. I'm only telling you this so you'll know where you're at. Anyway, I have no children's books, and I wouldn't sell you any other kind. So now we understand each other, I hope." After saying all this without taking his pipe out of his mouth, he opened his book again and went on reading. The boy nodded silently and turned to go, but somehow he felt that he couldn't take the last remark laying down. He turned around and softly said, "All children aren't like that." Slowly the man looked up removed his spectacles. Let me start that over. Slowly the man looked up again, removed his spectacles. "You still there? What must I do to get rid of you? And what this terribly important thing you had to tell me?" "It wasn't terribly important," said the boy, still more softly. "I only wanted to say that all children aren't the way you said." "Really?" The man raised his eyebrows in affectionate surprise. "Then you must be the big exception, I presume." The fat boy didn't know what to say. He only shrugged his shoulders a little and turned to go. "Anyway," he heard the gruff voice behind him, "where are your manners? If you had any, you'd be introducing yourself." "My name is Bastian," said the boy. "Bastian Balthazar Bucks." "That's a rather odd name," the man grumbled. "All those B's. Oh well, you can't help it. You don't choose it. My name is Carl Conrad Carmender. That makes 3 C's. The man grumbled. "Quite right." He puffed a few clouds. "Oh well, our names don't really matter, and we'll never see each other again, so... But before you leave, there's just one thing I'd like to know. What made you come bursting into my shop like that? It looked to me as if you were running away from something. Am I right?" Bastian nodded. Suddenly his round face was a little paler than before, and his eyes a little larger. "I suppose you made off with somebody's cash box," Mr. Coroner conjectured. "Or knocked that an old woman down. Whatever little scamps like you do nowadays. Are the police..." "Hi. What's up?"
You're doing a good reading.
"Hey, thanks."
You're doing a good job.
"Okay, thanks.
Love your glasses.
I love my glasses too. You can sit down here with me if you like."
No thanks.
"No, thanks."
Do
Where
you know
was
if
it?
Mom's coming home?
Of course she's coming home.
No, but it's like how long?
I don't know. Soon.
I thought you would.
I suppose you made off with somebody's cash box, Mr. Coroner conjectured. Or knocked an old woman down, or whatever little scamps like you do nowadays. Are the police after you, boy? Bastian shook his head. "Speak up," said Mr. Coroner. "Whom are you running from?" "The others." "What others?" "The children in my class." "Why?" "They won't leave me alone." What do they do to you?" "They wait for me outside the schoolhouse." "And then what?" "And they shout all sorts of things, and pushed me around and laughed at me. And you just put up with it." Mr. Coroner looked at the boy for a while disapprovingly. Then he asked, "Why do you just give them a punch on the nose?" Bastian gaped. "No, I wouldn't want to do that. And besides, I can't box." "How about wrestling?" Mr. Coroner asked. "Or running, swimming, football, gymnastics? Are you no good at any of them?" The boy shook his head. "In other words, Mr. Coroner, you're a weakling, Bastian." "In other words," said Mr. Coroner, forgot his voice, "you're a weakling." Bastian shrugged his shoulders. "But you can still talk," said Mr. Coroner. "Why don't you talk back at them? And the ones that make fun of you?" "I tried." "And?" "They threw me into a garbage can and tied the lid on. I yelled for 2 hours before somebody heard me." Mr. Coroner grumbled. "And now you don't dare." Bastian nodded. "In that case," Mr. Coroner concluded, "you're a scaredy cat too." Bastian hung his head. "And probably a hopeless grind. Best in the class, teacher's pet, the whole nine. Is that it?" No," said Bastian, still looking down. "I was put back last year." "Good Lord," cried Mr. Coroner. "A failure all along the line." Bastian said nothing. He just stood there in dripping coat. His arms hung limp at his sides. "What kind of things do they do when they yell at you and they make fun of you?" Mr. Coroner wanted to know. "Oh, all kinds. For instance?" "Namby-pamby sits on the pot. The pot cracks up. Says namby-pamby. I guess it's 'cause I weigh a lot." "Not very clever at all," said Mr. Coroner. "What else?" Bastian hesitated before listening. "Screwball, nitwit, braggart, liar." "Screwball? Why do they call you that?" "I talk to myself sometimes." "What kind of things do you say?" "I think of stories. I invent names and words that don't exist. That kind of thing." "And you say these things to yourself? Why?" "Well, nobody else would be interested." Mr. Coroner fell into a thoughtful silence. "What do your parents do about this?" Bastian didn't answer right away. After a while, he mumbled. "Father doesn't say anything. He never says anything. It's all the same to him." "And your mother?" She's gone." "Your parents are divorced?" "No," said Bastian. "She's dead." At the moment, the telephone rang. With some difficulty, Mr. Coroner pulled himself out of his armchair and shuffled into a small room behind the shop. He picked up the receiver and indistinctly Bastian heard him saying his name. After that, there was nothing to be heard but a low mumbling. Bastian just stood there. He didn't quite know why he had said all he had and admitted so much. Dad is home. Still working, started at 9:30 in the morning. I was trying to relax. In Dom's life. Hey, Joker. Hey, Katie. How are you and the baby doing? Where are we at? Bastian just stood there. He didn't know why he had said all that he had said and admitted so much. He hated being questioned like that. He broke into a sweat as it occurred to him that he was already late for school. He'd have to hurry. Oh yes, he'd have to run. But he just stood there, unable to move. Something held him fast. He didn't know what. He could still hear the muffled voice from the back room. It was a long telephone conversation. It came to Bastian that he had staring at the wall the whole time at a book that Mr. Coroner had been holding and that was now lying on the armchair. He couldn't take his eyes off it. It seemed to have a kind of magnetic power that attracted him irresistibly. He went over to the chair, slowly held his hand, and touched the book. In that moment, something inside him went click, as though a trap had shut. Bastian had a vague feeling that touching the book had started something irrevocable, which would now take its course. He picked up the book and examined it from all sides. It was bound in copper-colored silk that shimmered when he moved it about. Leaping through the pages, he saw the book was printed in 2 colors. There seemed to be no pictures, but there were large, beautiful capital letters at the beginning of the chapters. Examining the binding more closely, he discovered 2 snakes on it, one light and one dark. They were biting each other's tail, so forming an oval. And inside the oval, in strangely intricate letters, was this title, The Neverending Story. Human passions have mysterious ways, in children as well as grown-ups. Those affected by them can't explain them, and those who haven't known them have no understanding of them at all. Some people risk their lives to conquer a mountain peak. No one, not even themselves, can really explain why. Others ruin themselves trying to win the heart of a certain person who wants nothing to do with them. Still, others are destroyed by their devotion to the pleasures of the table. Some are so bent on winning a game of chance that they lose everything they own, and some sacrifice everything for a dream that can never come true. Some think their only hope of happiness lies in being somewhere else, and spend their whole lives traveling from place to place. And some find no rest until they have become powerful. In short, there are as many different passions as there are people. Bastian Balthasar Buck's passion was books. If you have never spent whole afternoons with blurring ears and rumpled hair, forgetting the world around you over a book, forgetting cold and hunger. If you have never read secretly under the bedclothes with a flashlight because your father or mother or some other well-meaning person had switched off the lamp on the plausible ground that it was time to sleep because you had to get up so early. If you never wept bitter tears because a wonderful story has come to an end and you must take your leave of characters with whom you have shared so many adventures, whom you have loved and admired, for whom you have hoped and feared, and without whose company life seems empty and meaningless. If such things have not been part of your own experience, you probably would not understand what Bastian did next. Staring at the title of the book, he turned hot and cold, cold and hot. Here was just what he had dreamed of, what he had longed for forever since the passion of books had taken hold of him. A story that never ended. The book of books. He had to have the book at any price. At any price? That was easily said. Even if he had to... Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Phone call, be right back. I got it. Even if he had had more to offer than the bit of pocket money he had on him, this cranky Mr. Coroner had given him clearly to understand that he would never sell him a single book. And he certainly wouldn't give it away. The situation was hopeless. Yet Bastian knew he couldn't leave without the book. It was clear to him that he had only come to the shop because of this book. It had called him in some mysterious way, because it wanted to be his, because it had somehow always belonged to him. Bastian listened to the mumbling from the little black book from the little back room. In a twinkling, before he knew it, he had the book under his coat, and he was hugging it with both arms. Without a sound, he backed up to the street door, keeping an anxious eye on the other door, the one leading to the back room. Cautiously, he turned the door handle. To keep the brass bell from ringing, he opened the glass just wide enough for him to slip through. He quietly closed the door behind him. Only then did he start running. The books, copybooks, pens, and pencils in the satchel jiggled, rattled to the rhythm of his steps. He had a stitch in his side, but he kept on running. The rain fell down his face and into his collar. The wet cold passed through his coat, but Bastian didn't feel it. He felt hot all over, but not from running. His conscience, which hadn't let out a peep in the bookshop, had suddenly woken up. All the arguments that had seemed so convincing melted away like snowmen under the fiery breath of a dragon. He had stolen. He was a thief. What he had done was worse than a common thief. That book was certainly only one of a kind and impossible to replace. It was surely Mr. Cornder's greatest treasure. Stealing a violinist's precious violin or a king's crown wasn't at all the same as filching money from a cash drawer. As he ran, he hugged the book tight under his coat. Regardless of what this book might cost him, he couldn't bear to lose it. It was all he had left in the world, because, naturally, he couldn't go home anymore. He tried to imagine his father at work in the big room he had furnished as a laboratory. Around him lay dozens of plaster casts of human teeth, for his father was a dental technician. Bastian had never stopped to ask himself whether his father enjoyed his work. It occurred to him now for the first time, but now he would never be able to ask him. If he went home now, his father would come out of his lab in a white smock, possibly holding a plaster cast, and he would ask, "Home so soon?" "Yes," Bastian would ask her. "No school today?" He saw his father's quiet, sad face, and he knew he couldn't possibly lie to him. Much less could he tell him the truth. No, the only thing left for him was go away somewhere, far, far away. His father must never find out that his son was a thief, and maybe he wouldn't even notice that Bastian wasn't there anymore. Bastian found this thought almost comforting. He had stopped running. Walking slowly, he saw the schoolhouse at the end of the street. Without thinking, he was taking his usual route to school. He passed a few people here and there, yet the street seemed deserted. But to a schoolboy arriving very, very late, the world around the schoolhouse always seemed to have gone dead. At every step he felt the fear rising within him. Under the best of circumstances, he was afraid of school, the place of his daily defeats, afraid of his teachers, who gently appealed to his conscience or made him the butt of their rages, afraid of all other children, who made fun of him and never missed a chance to show him how clumsy and defenseless he was. He had always thought of school his school years as a prison term with no end in sight, a misery that would continue until he grew up, something he would just have to live through. But when he now passed through the echoing corridors with their smell of floor wax and wet overcoats, when the lurking stillness suddenly stopped his ears like cotton, and when at last he reached the door of his classroom, which was painted the same old spinach color as the walls around it, he realized this, too, was no place for him. He would have to go away, so he might as well go at once. But where to? Bastian had read stories about boys who ran away to the sea and sailed out into the world to make their fortune. Some became pirates or heroes, others grew rich, and when they returned home years later, no one could guess who they were. But Bastian didn't feel up to that kind of thing. He couldn't conceive of anyone taking him on as a cabin boy. Besides, he had no idea how to reach a seaport with suitable ship for such an undertaking. So where could he go? Suddenly he thought of the right place, the only place where, at least for the time being, no one would find him or even look for him. The attic of the school was large and dark. It smelled of dust and mothballs. Not a sound to be heard, except for the muffled drumming of the rain on the enormous tin roof. Great beams blackened with age rose at regular intervals from the plank floor, joined with other beams at head height, and lost themselves in the darkness. Here and there, spider webs as big as hammocks swayed gently in the air currents. A milky light fell from a skylight in the roof. The one living thing in this place where time seemed to stand still was a little mouse that came hobbling across the floor, leaving tiny footprints in the dust, and, between them, a fine line, a tail print. Suddenly, it stopped and pricked up its ears. and then it vanished, whoosh, into a hole in the floor. The mouse had heard the sound of a key and a big lock. The attic door opened slowly with a loud squeak. For a moment, a long strip of light crossed the room. Bastian slipped in. Then again with a squeak, the door closed. Bastian put the big key in the lock from the inside and turned it. Then he pushed the bolt and heaved a sigh of relief. Now, no one could possibly find him. No one would look here for him. The place was seldom used. He was pretty sure of that. And even if by chance someone had something to do in the attic today or tomorrow, he would simply find the door locked, and the key would be gone. And even if they somehow got the door open, Bastian would have time to hide behind the junk that was stored here. Little by little, his ears got used to the dim light. His ears didn't get used to the dim light. Little by little, his eyes got used to the dim light. He knew the place. Some months before, he had helped the janitor to carry a laundry basket full of old copybooks up there. And then he had seen where the key to the attic door was kept, in a wall cupboard next to the topmost flight of stairs. He hadn't thought of it since, but today he had remembered. Bastian began to shiver. His coat was soaked through, and it was cold in the attic. The first thing to do was to find a place where he could make himself more or less comfortable, because he took it for granted that he'd have to stay here a long time. How long? The question didn't enter his head, nor did it occur to him that he would soon be hungry and thirsty. He looked around for a while. The place was crammed with junk, all kinds of junk. There were shelves full of old files and records. Benches and ink-stained desks were heaped up every which way. A dozen old maps were hanging on an iron frame. There were blackboards that had lost a good deal of their black, and cast iron stoves, broken down pieces of gym equipment, including a horse with the stuffing coming out through the cracks in its hide, and a number of soiled mats. There were also quite a few stuffed animals, at least what the moths had left of them. A big owl, a golden eagle, a fox, and so on. Cracked retorts and other chemical equipment, a galvanometer, whatever that is, a human skeleton hanging on the clothes rack, and a large number of cartons full of old books and papers. Bastian finally decided to make his home on a pile of old gym mats. When he stretched out on them, it was almost like laying on a sofa. He dragged them to the place under the skylight where the light was best. Not far away, he found a pile of gray army blankets. They were dusty and ragged, but that didn't matter now. He carried them over to his nest. He took off his wet coat and hung it on the clothes rack beside the skeleton. The skeleton jingled and swayed, but Bastian had no fear of it, maybe because he was used to such things at home. He also removed his wet shoes. In his stocking feet, he squatted down on the mats and wrapped himself in gray blankets like an Indian. Beside him lay school satchel and the copper-colored book. It passed through his mind that the rest of them down in the classroom would be having history just then. Maybe they'd be writing a composition on some deadly dull subject. Bastian looked at the book. I wonder, he said to himself, what's in the book while it's closed? Oh, I know. It's full of letters, printed on paper. But all the same, something must be happening. Because as soon as I opened it, there's a whole story with people I don't know yet, and all kinds of adventures and deeds and battles. And sometimes there are storms at sea, where it takes you to strange cities and countries. All those things are somehow shut up in a book. Of course, you have to read it to find out. But it's already there. That's the funny thing. I just wish I knew how it would be. Suddenly, an almost festive mood came over him. He settled himself, picked up the book, opened it to the first page, and began to read The Neverending Story. What's up, Indy with the hair? First chapter, Fantasia in Danger. How do you guys like it so far? Pretty good? Okay? Like the movie? Not like the movie? I think it's pretty much like the movie now. So far, so good. If you've never seen the movie, it's a pretty good movie. You should watch it. It's a pretty good book. Welcome in, Zoe Simpson. So far, so good. So, all the beasts in Howling Forest were safe in their caves, nests, and burrows. It was midnight. The storm wind was whistling through the tops of the great ancient trees. The towering trunks creaked and groaned. Suddenly a faint light came zigzagging through the woods, stopped here and there, trembling fitfully, flew up into the air, wrestled on a branch, and a moment later hurried on. It was a glittering sphere about the size of a child's ball. It moved in long leaps, touched the ground now and then bounded up again. But it wasn't a ball. It was a will-o'-the-wisp. It had lost its way, and something quite unusual even in Fantasia, because ordinarily will-o'-the-wisps make other loose their way. Inside the ball of light was a small, exceedingly active figure, which ran and jumped with all its might. It was neither male nor female, for such distinctions don't exist among will-o'-the-wisps. In its right hand it carried a tiny white flag, which glittered behind it. That meant it was either a messenger or a flag of truce bearer. You'd think it would have bumped into a tree, leaping like that in the darkness, but there was no danger of that, for will-o'-the-wisps are incredibly nimble and can change direction in the middle of a leap. That explains the zigzagging, but in a general sort of way, it moved in a definite direction. Up to the moment when it came to a juddering crag and started back in a fright. Whimpering like a puppy, it sat down on a fork of a tree and pondered a while before venturing out and cautiously looking around the crag. Up again it saw a clearing in the woods, and there in the light of the campfire sat 3 figures of different sizes and shapes. A giant who looked as if the whole of him were made of gray stone lay stretched out on his belly. He was almost 10 feet long, propped up one elbow. He was looking into the fire. In his weather-beaten stone face, which seemed strangely small in comparison with his powerful shoulders, his teeth stood out like a row of steel chisels. The will-o'-the-wisp recognized him as belonging to the family of rock chewers. They were creatures who lived in a mountain range inconceivably far from Howling Forest. But they not only lived in the mountain range, they also lived on it. For little by little, they were eating it up. Rocks were their only food. Luckily, a little went a long way. They could live for weeks and months on a single bite of this, for them, extremely nutritious fare. There weren't very many rock chewers, and besides, it was a large mountain range. But since these giants had been there a long time, they lived to greater age than most of the inhabitants of Fantasia. Those mountains had come, over the years, to look very strange, like an enormous Swiss cheese, full of holes and grottos, and that is where they were known as the Cheese Whizzies. But the rock chewers not only fed on stone, they made everything they needed out of it. Furniture, hats, shoes, tools, even a cuckoo clock. So it was not surprising that the vehicle of this particular giant was one that was leaning up against the tree behind him. It was a sort of bicycle made entirely of this material, with 2 wheels that looked like enormous millstones. On the whole, it suggested a steamroller with pedals. The second figure, who was sitting to the right of the first, was a little night-hob, no more than twice the size of the will-o'-the-wisp. He looked like a pitch-black, furry caterpillar sitting up. He had little pink hands, with which he gestured violently as he spoke, and below his tousled black hair, Two big round eyes glowed like moons in what was presumably his face. Since there were night hobs, all the shapes and sizes in every part of Fantasia, it was hard to tell by the sight of him whether this one had come from far or near. But one could guess that he was traveling because the unusual amount of night hobs. A large bat, wrapped on his wings like a closed umbrella, was hanging head down from a nearby branch. It took the will-o'-the-wisp some time to discover the third person on the left side of the fire, for he was so small as to be scarcely discernible from that distance. He was one of the tinies, a delicately built little fellow in a bright-colored suit and a top hat. The will-o'-the-wisp knew next to nothing about tinies, but it had once heard of these people built whole cities in the branches of trees, and that the houses were connected by stairways, rope ladders, and ramps. But the tinies lived in an entirely different part of the boundaries of Fantasia Empire, even further away than the rock chewers. Rock chewers, not crawlers. Which made it all the more amazing that the mount which had evidently carried the tiny all this way was, of all things, a snail. Its pink shell was surmounted by a gleaming silver saddle, and its bridle, as well as the reins fastened to its feelers, glittered like silver threads. The will-o'-the-wisp couldn't get over it that three such different creatures should be sitting there so peacefully, for harmony between different species was by no means the rule in Fantasia. Battles and wars were frequent, and certain of the species had been known to feud for hundreds of years. Moreover, not all the inhabitants of Fantasia were good and honorable. There were also thieving, wicked, and cruel ones. The will-o'-the-wisp itself belonged to a family that was hardly reputed for truthfulness or reliability. After observing the scene of the firelight for some time, the will-o'-the-wisp noticed that each of the three had something white, either a flag or a white scarf worn across his chest, which meant that they were messengers or flag of truce bearers, and that of course accounted for the peaceful atmosphere. Could they be traveling on the same business as the will-o'-the-wisp? What they were saying couldn't be heard from a distance because of the howling wind in the treetops. But since they respected one another as messengers, mightn't they recognize the will-o'-the-wisp in the same capacity and refrain from harming him? It had to ask someone that way. It had to ask someone the way, and there seemed little likelihood of finding a better opportunity at this hour in the middle of the woods. So plucking up the courage, it ventured out of its hiding place and hovered trembling in midair, waving its white flag. The rock chewer, whose face was turned in that direction, was first to notice the will-o'-the-wisp.
"Lots of traffic around here tonight,"
he crackled.
"Here comes another one."
"Whew, it's a will-o'-the-wisp," whispered the night hob, and his moon eyes glowed. "Pleased to meet you." The tiny stood up, took a few steps toward the newcomer, and chirped. "If my eyes don't deceive me, you are here as a messenger." "Yes, indeed," said the will-o'-the-wisp. The tiny removed his red top hat, made a slow bow, and twittered. "Oh, you don't join us, please? We, too, are messengers. Won't you be seated?" And with his hat, he motioned toward an empty place by the fire. "Many thanks," said the will-o'-the-wisp, coming timidly closer. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Blub." "Delighted," said the tiny. "Mine is Gluckok." Gluckok. Gluckuk. Weird name. The night hob bowed without getting up. "My name is Wushiwoozle." And mine,
And mine.
the rock chewer crackled, is... I'm not even going to try this one. Let's just call him... let's call him Krakazar. And three looked at the Will-o'-the-Wisp, who was wriggling with embarrassment. Will-o'-the-Wisps find it most unpleasant to be looked full in the face. I'm not going to do all the voices because this is a tough conversation. Won't you sit down, dear Blub, said the Tiny. To tell the truth, said the Will-o'-the-Wisp, I'm in a little bit of a terrible hurry. I only wanted to ask if by any chance you knew the way to the ivory tower. Whew, said the Night Hob. Could you be going to the sea to see the childlike empress? Exactly, said the Will-o'-the-Wisp. I have an important message for her.
What does it say?
The rock chewer crackled. But you see, said the Will-o'-the-Wisp, shifting its weight from foot to foot, it is a secret message. All three of us, who have the same mission as you, replied Vushivul. I'm just going to call him Zul. They're very long names. Vazul, the Night Hob. That makes us partners. Maybe we even have the same message, said Gluckuk, the Tiny. Sit down and tell us. I can't even... It's Piorn Krakazark. Piorn Krakazark. Zark crackled. I'm just going to call him Zark. The Will-o'-the-Wisp sat down in the empty place. My home, it began after a moment's hesitation, is a long way from here. I don't know any of those present had heard of it. It's called Moldimore. Whoo! Cried the Night Hob delightfully. A loving country. The Will-o'-the-Wisp smiled faintly. Yes, it is. Is that all you have to say? Blub crackled. What is the purpose of your trip? Something has happened in Moldimore, said the Will-o'-the-Wisp. Something impossible to understand. Actually, it's still happening. It's hard to describe. The way it began was, well, in the east of our country, there's a lake. That is, there was a lake. Lake Foaming Broth, we called it. Well, the way it began was like this. One day, Lake Foaming Broth wasn't there anymore. It was gone. See?
You mean it dried up?
No, said the Will-o'-the-Wisp. Then there'd just be a dried up lake. But there isn't. Where the lake used to be, there's nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now do you see?
A hole.
The rock chewer grunted. No, not a hole, said the Will-o'-the-Wisp desperately. A hole, after all, is something. This is nothing at all. The three other messengers exchanged glances. What? Who does this nothing look like? Asked the Night Hob. That's just what's so hard to describe, said the Will-o'-the-Wisp unhappily. It doesn't look like anything. It's like, there's no word for it. Maybe the Tiny suggested, when you look at a place, it's as if you were blind. The Will-o'-the-Wisp stared open-mouthed. Exactly, it cried. But where? I mean, how? I mean, have you had the same?
Wait a minute.
The rock chewer crackled.
Was it only this one place?
At first, yes, the Will-o'-the-Wisp explained. That is, the place got bigger, little by little. And then all of a sudden, Foggle, the father of frogs, who lived in Lake Foaming Broth, with his family, was gone too. Some of the inhabitants started running away, but little by little the same thing happened to other parts of Moldimore. It usually started with just a little chunk, no bigger than a partridge egg. But then, these chunks got bigger and bigger. If somebody put his foot onto one of them by mistake, the foot, or hand, or whatever else he put in, would be gone too. It didn't hurt. It was just that part of whoever it was would be missing. Some would even fall in on purpose if they got too close to the nothing. It has an irresistible attraction. The bigger the place, the stronger the pull. None of us could imagine what this terrible thing might be, what caused it, and what we could do about it. And seeing that it didn't go away by itself, but kept spreading, we finally decided to send a messenger to the childlike empress to ask for her advice and help. Well, I'm the messenger. The three others gazed silently into space. After a while, the night hop sighed. Whoo! It's the same where I come from, and I'm traveling on the exact same errand. Ooh, ooh. The tiny turned to the will-o'-the-wisp. Each of us, he chirped, comes from a different province of Fantasia. We've met here entirely by chance, but each one of us is going to the childlike empress with the same message.
And the message, granted the drop chewer, is that all Fantasia is in danger.
The will-o'-the-wisp cast a terrified look at each one in turn. If that's the case, they cried, jumping up, we haven't a moment to lose. We were just going to start, said the tiny. We only stopped to rest because it's so awfully dark here in Howling Forest. But now that you've joined us, Glub, you can light the way. Impossible, said the will-o'-the-wisp. Would you expect me to wait for someone who rides a snail? Sorry, but it's a racing snail, said the tiny, somewhat miffed. Otherwise, whoo, the night hop sighed, we won't tell you which way to go. Who are you people talking to? The rock chewer crackled.
Who are you people talking to?
And sure enough, the will-o'-the-wisp hadn't even heard the other messenger's last words, for it was already flitting through the forest in long leaps. Oh well, said the tiny, pushing his top hat onto the back of his head now. Maybe it wouldn't have been such a good idea to follow a will-o'-the-wisp. To tell the truth, said the night hop, I prefer to travel on my own, because I, for one, fly. With a quick hoo-hoo, he ordered his bat to make ready, and whoosh, away he flew. The rock chewer put out the campfire with the palm of his hand.
I, too, prefer to go by myself, he crackled in the darkness. Then I don't need to worry about squashing some wee critter.
Rattling and grinding, he rode his stone bicycle straight through the woods, now and then thudding into a giant tree. Slowly the clatter receded in the distance. Gluck the tiny was last to set out. He seized the silvery reins and said, All right, we'll see who gets there first. Gee-yap! Old-timer gee-yap! And he clicked his tongue, and then there was nothing to be heard but the storm wind howling in the treetops. Gotta take a break. I'm getting tired. I hope that reading it is doing the story justice, because it is a good story. If you watched it when you were a kid, or if you watched it at all, it is a fun story. It really is. It was one of my favorite movies growing up. I remember every time it came on, I wanted to watch it, because back then we had VCRs, and if you had the tape, you were lucky. If you didn't have it, you watched it when it came on. And it was always fun to see. It used to be Channel 7 here where I live anyway, in New York. It would start out as like this little dot, and then you would see it spinning like this, and it was Channel 7, and it said special. And it had like this, like, it's kind of like belly cha-ching. And it was always fun to see that. And I remember Charlie Brown Christmas and Charlie Brown Thanksgivings were always one that got me. That got me when it said special, and it was pretty cool. All your voices sound like the different Sopranos characters. You remember that show? It's probably only a New York, New Jersey thing, tri-state area. You know, that broadcast. But I remember it like that, and I remember this was one of those movies that when it came on, I couldn't wait to watch it. It was such a fun story to follow along with. It wasn't like Labyrinth or Dark Crystal where it was like this whole fictional thing that was, you know, this giant performance in front of you. It was more like you could be Bastion for the day. You could be Bastion for the next hour and 40 minutes, and watch it and put yourself in that position. You know, hunker down with a blanket and pillow on the couch and get some popcorn and sit there and just watch. And it was a lot of fun. And this was one for me. This was one of those movies. The other was The Wizard of Oz was another one. Yes, The Wizard of Oz is like, yeah, yeah. That's funny that you wrote that just as I said it. Yeah, The Wizard of Oz was another one of them. And I remember I used to always get so scared when the monkeys would take away the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. It was good stuff. Anyway, where were we? I'll continue. The clock in the belfry struck 9. Reluctantly, Bastion's thoughts turned back to the reality. He was glad the Neverending Story had nothing to do with that. He didn't like the books in which dull, cranky writers describe humdrum events in the very humdrum lives of humdrum people. Reality gave him enough of that kind of thing. Why should he read about it? Besides, he couldn't stand it when a writer tried to convince him of something. And these humdrum books, it seemed to him, were always trying to do just that. Bastian liked books that were exciting or funny, or that made him dream. Books were made up of characters and marvelous adventures, books that made him imagine all sorts of things. Because one thing he was good at, possibly the only thing, was imagining things so clearly that he almost saw and heard them. When he told himself stories, he sometimes forgot everything around him and awoke, as though from a dream, only when the story was finished. And this book was just like his own stories. In reading it, he had heard not only the creaking of the big trees and the howling wind of the treetops, but also the different voices of the 4 comical messengers, and he almost seemed to catch the smell of moss and forest earth. Down in the classroom, they were starting in on nature study that consisted almost entirely in counting pistils and stamens. Bastian was glad to be up here in his hiding place where he could read. This, he thought, was just the right book for him. A week later, Vazul, we'll call him Vazul, the little night hob, arrived at his destination. He was the first, or rather, he thought he was the first, because he was riding through the air. Just as the setting sun turned the clouds to liquid gold, he noticed that his bat was circling over the labyrinth. That was the name of an enormous garden, extending from horizon to horizon and filled with the most bewitching scents and dreamy colors. Broad avenues and narrow paths twined their way among copses, lawns and beds of the rarest, strangest flowers in a design so artful and intricate that the whole plain resembled an enormous maze. Of course, it had been designed only for pleasure and amusement, with no intention of endangering anyone, much less of warding off an enemy. It would have been useless for such purposes, and the childlike empress required no such protection, because in all the unbound reaches of Fantasia there was no one who would even thought of attacking her. For that there was no reason, as we shall soon see. While gliding soundlessly over the flowering maze,
The night hob sighted all sorts of animals. In a small clearing behind the lilacs and laburnum, a group of young unicorns was playing in the evening sun, and once, glancing under a giant bluebell, he even thought he saw the famous phoenix in its nest, but he was quite certain, and such was his haste, that he didn't want to turn back to make sure. For at the center of the labyrinth, there now appeared, shimmering in fairy whiteness. Man, I'm losing my shit right now. Sorry. I gotta focus in on this. For at the center of the labyrinth now appeared, shimmering in fairy whiteness, the ivory tower, the heart of Fantasia, and the residence of the childlike empress. The word tower might give someone who has never seen it the wrong idea. It had nothing of church or castle about it. The ivory tower was as big as a whole city. From a distance it looked like a pointed mountain peak twisted like a snail shell. Its highest point was deep in the clouds. Only on coming closer could you notice that this great sugar loaf consisted of innumerable towers, turrets, domes, roofs, orioles, terraces, arches, stairways, and balustrades. I don't know what that word is. All marvelously fitted together. The whole was made of the whitest Fantasian ivory, so delicately carved in every detail that it might have been taken for the lattice work of the finest lace. These buildings housed the childlike empress court, her chamberlains and her maidservants, wise women and astrologers, magicians and jesters, messengers, cooks and acrobats, her tightrope walkers and storytellers, heralds, gardeners, watchmen, tailors, shoemakers, and alchemists. And at the very summit of the great tower lived the childlike empress in a pavilion shaped like a magnolian blossom. On certain nights, when the full moon shone most gloriously in the starry sky, the ivory petals opened wide, and the childlike empress would be sitting in the middle of the glorious flower. Riding on his back, the little night hob landed on one of the lower terraces where the stables were located. Someone must have announced his arrival, for 5 imperial grooms were there waiting for him. They helped him out of the saddle, bowed to him, and held out a ceremonial welcome cup. As etiquette demanded, Vazul took only a sip and then returned the cup. Each of the grooms took a sip, and when they bowed again, and led their bat to the stables. All this was done in silence. On reaching its appointed place, the bat touched neither food nor drink, but immediately rolled up, hung himself head down on a hook, and fell into a deep sleep. The little night hob had demanded a bit too much of his mount. The grooms left it alone and crept away from the stable on tiptoes. In this stable there were many other mounts. 2 elephants, one pink and one blue, a gigantic griffin with its 4 quarters of an eagle and the hind quarters of a lion, a winged horse whose name was once known even outside of Fantasia but is now forgotten, several flying dogs, a few other bats, and several dragonflies and butterflies for especially small riders. In other stables there were still other mounts which didn't fly but ran, crawled, hopped, or swam, and each had a groom of its own to feed and take care of it. Ordinarily one would have expected to hear quite a cacophony of different voices. Cacophony? What's a cacophony? I never heard of such a word. There's a few words in here I never heard before. Expected to hear quite a
That's got to be a word I've heard before. Cacophony. Cacophony. Quite a cacophony of different voices. Roaring, screeching, piping, chirping, croaking, and chattering. But that day there was utter silence. The little night hob was still standing where the grooms had left him. Suddenly, without knowing why, he felt dejected and discouraged. He too was exhausted after the long trip, and not even the knowledge that he had arrived first could cheer him up. Suddenly I heard a chirping voice. "Hello, hello! If it isn't my good friend, Vazul. So glad you finally made it." The night hob looked around, and his moon eyes flared with amazement. For on a balustrade, leaning negligently against the flower pot, stood Gluckik, a tiny, tipping his red top hat. "Woohoo!" went the bewildered night hob, and again, "Woohoo!" He just couldn't think of anything better to say. "The other two haven't arrived yet. I've been here since yestermorn." "How? Woohoo! How did you do it?" "Simple," said the tiny, with a rather condescending smile. "Didn't I tell you I had a racing snail?" The night hob scratched his tangled black head fur with his little pink hand. "I must go to the childlike empress at once," he said mournfully. The tiny gave him a pensive look. He said. "I put in for an appointment yesterday." "Put in for my appointment?" asked the night hob. "Can't we just go see her?" "I'm afraid not," chirped the tiny. We'll have a long wait. You can't imagine how many messengers have turned up." "Woohoo!" the night hob sighed. "How come?" "You'd better take a look for yourself," the tiny twittered. "Come here with me, my dear Vazul. Come with me." The two of them started out. The high street, which wound around the ivory tower in a narrowing spiral, was clogged with a dense crowd of the strangest creatures. Enormous, I don't know what any of these words are. Band the Jins, tiny kobolds, three-headed trolls, bearded dwarfs, glittering fairies, goat-legged fauns, nixies with wavy gold hair, sparkling snow sprites, and countless others who knowing about, standing in groups, or sitting silently on the ground, discussing the situation or gazing glumly into the distance. Bazul stopped still when he saw them. "Who?" he said. "What's going on? What are they all doing here?" "They're all messengers," Gluckik explained. "Messages from all over Fantasia, all with the same message as ours. I've spoken with several of them. The same menace seems to have broken out everywhere." The night hob gave vent to a long, wheezing sigh. "Do they know," he asked, "what it is and where it comes from?" "I'm afraid not. Nobody knows." "What about the childlike empress?" "The childlike empress," said the tiny in an undertone, "is ill, very ill. Maybe that's because of this mysterious calamity that's threatening all of Fantasia. But so far, none of the many doctors who have been conferring in the Magnolia Pavilion have discovered the nature of her illness or found a cure for it." "That," said the night hob breathlessly, "is terrible." "So it is," said the tiny. In view of the circumstances, Vazul decided not to put in for an appointment. 2 days later, Blub, the will-o'-the-wisp, arrived. Of course, he had hopped in the wrong direction and made an enormous detour. And finally, 3 days after that, Polchazark, the rock chewer, appeared. He came plodding along on his foot, for in a sudden frenzy of hunger he had eaten his stone bicycle. During a long waiting period, the four so unlike messengers became good friends. From then on, they stayed together, but that's another story, to be told another time. we're gonna stop because my eyes are getting tired. So, what do you think? Good story? I wish I knew the names. I need to go back and look at them. Fucking moments, what's happening? I hope there's no kids in here. I don't think there is. I'm glad you like it. I'm sorry that I'm terrible with the names. The names are like 15 letters long. I feel like I'm reading a Czechoslovakian dinner menu. Who else is here? Let's say hello to everybody. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. I really am. I know that it's not everybody's bag. I wasn't expecting a huge turnout, but I like 9. It got me relaxed. The names are hard. Yes, indeed, they are. Absolute awesomeness. I'm glad. Yeah, it's a good book. A lot of the names and words are difficult to read, and given the fact that I'm not used to these glasses yet, but we got through the first chapter and the introduction, so I think that's good. I think the only thing that's weird is that Atreyu, I'm guessing, is the will o' the wisp. No, Atreyu's not the will o' the wisp. Who was the character that is the... I'm trying to think now. Because Atreyu is asked by his tribe to ride. Oh no, it is. So the will o' the wisp is Atreyu. Essentially, I guess. Harsh mix of unpleasant sounds. So how is it pronounced, though? Is it cacophony? Cacophony? I guess Coco is C-O-C-O, so cacophony. What's up, Shay? What time is it? 8 o'clock. So reading for just about an hour. That's about all I can handle. It's a lot of big words, a lot of stuff that I don't know the meanings of. So I'm glad, Gary. Thank you for cacophane. Cacophane? I am no longer with the IRS. Well, good for you. It's pronounced cacophane. Okay. Cacophany. Cacophany. Okay. Cacophany. I never heard the word before. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a heads up. Shay, I hope that makes you happy. I accepted a job with the VA. Nice. Good for you. Good for you. That's awesome news. Get away from that other trap you were in. You're welcome. So good. So we had a good read. It's a nice looking book too. I was gonna get the collector's edition, but it was $350. It's a beautiful book. It's leather bound. It's really beautiful. But this is actually a pretty cover too. I don't know if you can see that with the glares, but that's about as good as I'm gonna get it. It's a pretty good book. Pretty good looking book. No illustrations, obviously. There's a few like large letters, but that's it. The dictionary app will pronounce it for you. Yeah, but I'm not going to stop in the middle of reading the story to get the dictionary app pronunciations, especially since a lot of this stuff is fiction and not real words. Some of it is not real words, especially the names and such. Some of the language they use is probably a little higher than my education. But, oh, I'll hobble through it. I'll get through it for you guys. I mean, that's chapter 1, and the introduction took about an hour. So if we read there's 26 chapters. They look like they're an average of about 15 pages a chapter. So if we read, so tonight we read the introduction, the prologue, and the first chapter. So if we read 2 chapters a week, we'll be done in a short amount of time if we read 2 chapters. So maybe we'll do that. I'm glad that London came down and said that she enjoyed my impression of the bookstore owner. He didn't sound like that at all in the movie. It was something that I just started doing. And it was easy because it was just one guy. But once you start getting into all the little creatures and such, if you don't follow along close enough or you don't read the end of the sentence to see who's talking, there's no way for you to know which voice to do. So I didn't even want to pretend anymore. But it's a good story. I'm enjoying it. And the glasses helped. I don't think I was denying the fact that I needed reading glasses. But my eyes are good otherwise. So, and I thought the little babbling brook in the background was a nice little touch. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So, and since I have to be up at 4:30, I am going to call it a night. I got to get in bed shortly. And I hope that this helped you guys relax and maybe put you at ease a little bit. And you enjoyed it. And I hope you come back next week and we can do it again. I might come back on Tuesday. I'll update you guys and let you know. Just so we can get another book. We can get through this book and enjoy the ending together and start another book. Maybe something a little different. I did get the Witch, the Wardrobe, and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think that's what it is. I've only had the issue to use the bathroom 20 times because of that babbling brook. I wanted a little bit of noise in the background, just something. I guess London would have been enough. But what are you going to do? So I'm glad you guys stayed. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you guys come back for the rest of the story. It should be pretty good. I'll probably come back on Tuesday with it, but it won't be until 8 o'clock on Tuesday. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe Wednesday. London has dance. Maybe we'll do it on Wednesday and Thursday next week. I'll let you guys know over the weekend. I'll post something and we'll have a conversation about it. I'll mention it in the live. And hopefully we can read it relatively quick. It's fun to get to the ending, especially if you guys are enjoying the story. It's fun to get to the ending a little quicker. So hopefully it's all good. So Cooper got a Dirty Cooper got a haircut. Somebody go up and say hello to him and see how he did. They had to cut the hair on his ears because it was getting a little matted because it's very difficult to brush his ears. So I told him to cut his hair a little bit shorter this time, and hopefully it's all good. So I'll take a picture, I'll show you guys. So with that, I will say goodnight and say that I love you guys, and I'm thankful that you guys hung in there with me and sat here for the story. I do this for you guys, so I'm glad you guys stayed. So we'll see you guys in the morning, bright and early. Yeah? 5:25 or so. That's the new time the rooster gets on the ground. So I'll see you guys later. I love you guys. Have a good night. Thanks for coming along. I'll see you guys later.